The following is an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.
Hello and welcome to Shaw Community Access Television and to our program on the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. Today we have with us Major General Retired Herbert Pitts.
Good afternoon.
Herb. And Mrs. Betty Waldron. We're talking today about the regimental family. We've often heard of that term used, but we're not quite sure what it means. Herb, what do we mean by the term regimental family?
I guess there's a lot of meanings to that, Al, but speaking personally, I regard it as a collection of entities that bear a common heritage, I guess, or a common experience is probably a better word. Mm-hmm. In other words, there are elements of this regimental family who are still serving in active capacities within formed regiments, formed battalions, formed units, and those can be militia units in our case, or they can be a cadet corps, which is a formed part of the regiment as well. The other important element is, in an organizational sense, is again the association, the regimental association, which in our case has 4 branches. A big one in Toronto, a big one here on the island, a good-sized one in Calgary, a smaller but very energetic one in the Maritimes. Mm-hmm. So together we form a national association. Mm-hmm. I guess there's another group not organized or not structured, which includes friends of the regiment or people who have been part of it through various experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think of Betty here on my right, mm-hmm. Who is the wife of a soldier who served all of his professional adult years with the regiment, and she had a son who served with mm-hmm. another regiment, but that story is hers. Mm-hmm. But there's not only all these structured elements just described, but a loose association of friends that have been together through common experiences over a great many years.
And a great fellowship develops, an esprit de corps, and
you could call it that. That's a pretty formal name for especially the association part of it. Yes. But yes, there's a strong sense of esprit de corps in the formed regimental groups, mm-hmm. and those that are serving in the regiment.
Yes.
I guess it's friendship and common experiences for the more loosely lit group, the associations. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And certainly the families of members of those associations yes. are very much part of our fabric. Yes. And I think fair enough to say of our family too. So mm-hmm. we're an extended family starting with a common, if I could say birth, but a common nurturing in the form of having served in the regiment, yes. and then throughout life filtered away, gone on to do other mm-hmm. things, but want to maintain a tie somehow, which means that your friendships are nurtured, your support is nurtured, and when you really need help, mm-hmm. you know where to go. Yeah. And sometimes it's offered even if you're not asked for it.
And Betty, you're part of that
I am
fellowship.
Proud to be.
Yes. Yeah. Your husband served for a number of years.
My husband served with the Queen's Own, yes. Mm-hmm. And my son served with the Airborne.
Yes.
And
yeah.
both very proud to have served.
Yes. Yeah. So you're as such, I suppose they would have been away a lot when they were serving?
Yes, they were.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Away more than they were home
yes.
in most cases.
Yeah, and that was in peacetime.
Yeah, it was in peacetime, yes.
Yes, yeah. And when the men are away, are the families, the wives, together, or are they? Do they see each
Yes,
other?
you always have that support group there,
Yeah.
and there's friendships formed too that exist today
Yes.
through
They-
many years and many tears in some cases.
Yes. They go on for
They go on.
a long
Yes.
time.
Yes, they do.
The regiment, when a regiment is away, they have a rear party, do they?
They
that
have a rear
looks-
party that if you should need help
Yes.
or support, they're there to do that for
Oh,
you.
yes.
And they do.
And that was very important in the past.
It was. Yeah, it really was.
And now I believe there's a family resource center.
Yes, I believe there
Family
is.
support center,
Yes,
pardon me.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, I believe there
It
is.
does much the same function.
Yes, I understand it does.
But
yes.
I wonder if it's in the same personal sort of way with.
I don't know.
I don't know.
That I can't answer.
You know. Herb, what do you think?
Yeah, if I can just chip in here for a second, I think that that the Family Resource Center is a relatively recent phenomenon, probably
Yes.
brought about by the engagement in the former Yugoslavia and on from there, Bosnia through Afghanistan. Depending on the regiments, there were ways of bringing people together to support families
Yes.
when the men were away. It ranged from sort of formal organizations of wives groups, committees, clubs, to more loosely structured ones, which were gatherings of friends to support
Yes.
people.
You know.
Betty's got kind of an interesting story, though. I think it revolves around living in the Middle East for some time, so not always was she separated from her husband.
Oh, yes. So
We went-
you were in the Middle East.
Yes, we were. We went. We served in the Middle East for a year. My husband did served before
Yes.
that, and this was the first time that dependents could go.
The
with
families.
the families could go with their husbands.
Yes.
And we spent 6 months in Nahariya, which
Oh,
is
yes.
on the Israeli-Lebanese border,
Oh, yes.
right on the Mediterranean.
Yes.
Beautiful spot.
Yeah.
And then 6 months in Jerusalem,
Yeah.
which we enjoyed immensely.
What an opportunity.
It was. And we were
Yeah.
able to visit other countries
Yes.
while we were there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Were there other postings as well?
Yes, we were
The-
posted to Germany as
Oh,
a
yes.
family, and of course the Middle East, and then from one end of Canada to the
Yes.
other.
Yes.
And my husband, of course, had postings where we were not
Yes.
allowed to go.
Yes.
He served in Vietnam
Oh, yes.
with the International Control Commission,
Yeah.
and in Cyprus.
Yes.
That we were in it.
Yes. The Cyprus, they often say, is routine, but it wasn't always routine.
No, it wasn't.
No. Yeah.
But when we were in the Middle East, I did get an opportunity to visit Cyprus.
Oh, yes.
So,
Yeah. So you would say that the military life has had its moments.
it has. It
Some-
really has.
There's
I've-
some challenging ones, but some good ones.
Yes, I've enjoyed it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And Herb, today in the association, I guess the regimental family goes on in a way.
Well, it does. We've got a membership of about 280 here on the island. Now, that's pretty remarkable for a regiment which was removed from the order of battle, or at least parts of it,
Yes.
in 1970. That's 40 years ago.
Yes.
And friendships and bonds forged at that time still remain very strong.
Yes.
You can call that family ties too, I guess, of a sort. And the expression is often heard that, as I mentioned, I think perhaps in passing, that the family in the minds of many soldiers is a little stronger than his own family, particularly where it relates to brothers and sisters, because the people you've served with have shared all the experiences you've had over a period of your life, which tends to be very formative.
Yes.
And exciting in some ways, but has its challenges in other ways too. And with that family, you've probably surmounted those challenges,
Yeah.
and those memories will be with you for a lifetime.
Now I understand that there's some bursaries that are in the works.
Yeah, this is the 150th year of the Queen's Own, and we wanted to come up with a kind of a living way to share this memory with people, not only who have served, who may serve, but who are related somehow to the regiment, usually through blood.
Yeah.
In other words, the bursaries are being established for this year for passing to dependents of those who served in the regiment.
Oh, yes.
It will in future be open to the public, but one of the principal qualifications is relating to a regimental member. In other words, are you a relative?
Yes.
And you have to be able to state who it was and what he was in terms of being a rifleman in whatever years,
yes.
or an officer or an NCO. So we're trying to perpetuate the memory that way of service in the Queen's Own through bursaries to dependents.
I see. And if someone would like to apply for one of those, you would search on the internet, I guess.
You can.
Or get in
You
touch
can
with
find
the-
it on the internet. If you know of someone, of course, in the association here in Victoria or
Yes.
on the island,
Yes.
that's an easy way to get in touch.
Yeah.
I wish I had brought the proper email address with me today, but if you want to go on the internet, we're there at QOR.com.
Oh, okay.
QueensOwnRifles.com. QOR.com.
Yes. So the regimental family, alive and well,
And growing.
and growing, even in 2010, right here on Vancouver Island.
That's right.
Yes. Well, thank you both very much for being with us today and sharing a bit about the regimental family. We're going to take a break now, but we'll soon be back with further comments on the extended regimental family and how that's viewed from a gentleman from Holland.
You're watching an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.
Welcome back to the second section of our show on the regimental family of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. Today, at this time, I have with me Adrian Hofstad, who's a member of the extended family. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Now, you never were actually a member of the battalion.
No.
No. But they sort of adopted you.
Yes, they have, and I'm glad they did.
Yeah. How did that happen? Where does that?
I was liberated by the Queen's Own Rifles back in 1945.
Oh yes, you were in Holland.
I was in Holland as a little boy.
Yeah. What town were you living in?
A little place was called Doorn, just about dead center of Holland. Yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah. And you were there during the occupation.
5 years of misery.
Yes. Yeah. And then the Canadians came.
Oh yeah, and they sure did.
Yeah. What was that like?
Oh, very exciting. 5 years of misery and being booted around and being hungry and see no end to it. And all of a sudden the boys roll into town with the Bren carriers. And what can I say, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So that made quite a difference to your life.
Oh, you better believe it.
Yeah.
It sure did.
Now, were the parents say to stay away from the soldiers, or did
no.
They were friendly and
No, they were very friendly.
yeah. And so they what are some of the things that might have happened when?
Well, as soon as they walked into town or came into town with the trucks and the Brengan carriers, that's what I remember most. Our town was occupied by the Germans in many big houses. We had a sort of a resort town with castles and the largest open air swimming pool. We had the Dutch Royal Marines in our town, and the Germans had taken over all the big homes. But the Canadian boys couldn't go in there because they were booby-trapped. And so as soon as they came into town, the civilians took them in their houses.
Oh, yes.
And I used to carry their stuff into the houses and help them out and get some food. And then once they were established in their bigger places, I used to go down there at supper time and collect food that was left over to take it home so we had something to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had been about what?
I was 6 years old.
6
No,
years-
11 when
oh.
no 6 years when the occupation started
Yeah.
in 1940, and I was 11 when the boys came into town.
11 when they came to town. My
11.
gracious. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that the occupation took place, and the things improved.
They certainly did.
Yeah, and then at some point you decided to come to Canada.
Well, yeah, what happened was, first of all, I had an older sister. She was 10 years older, and she married a Canadian soldier
Really?
from Quebec,
Yeah.
Henri Mercier,
Oh, yeah.
a good French name.
Yes.
And she moved in 46 to Canada.
Yeah.
And of course, now I'm really excited.
Yeah.
And so, but I still had to go to school, and I went to technical college and
Yes.
served my 2 years in the army. I was a sergeant in the army,
Yeah. In the Dutch army.
in the Dutch army under NATO forces.
Yes.
And I wanted to go to Canada so badly, but you had to be 21.
Oh, yes.
And so I applied when I was in the army, and I had to go to the immigration inspector in The Hague. And I brought my 5 diplomas, and I was in my uniform, and the guy says, "We're sure glad to have you." I says, "I sure like to come," you know.
Yeah.
That's how that went.
Yeah. And so you came to Canada and found your way
1956.
out here to the West Coast.
Yeah, well, no, I started in Chatham, Ontario. Somebody
yes.
sponsored me there, and I got to
Yeah.
work over there, and
Yeah.
came to the West Coast to start a business, and
Yes.
That's how that went.
Yeah. And but you tied in with the Queen's Own again.
Yes, what happened was every time we went to visit Holland, we've been there many times, visit family, of course. I always looked for the big flag that was in our town that the boys had made. They had made it out
yes.
of cement, about 3 by 4 feet, and it had a big 2 in it. I don't remember what it said,
Yeah.
and I always looked for it. I couldn't find it. And then
Yeah.
last summer, when we were visiting, I found it in the plaza.
Oh,
And
yes.
it was very poorly kept, and it said Queen's Own Rifles of Canada.
Yeah.
And so I went to City Hall
Yeah.
and put in a complaint that they should keep it up a little better.
Yeah.
And well, they had a bit of, they weren't very helpful. And I gave them 2 weeks to smarten up,
Yeah.
and they didn't smarten up. So I went to the local newspaper, and
Yeah.
the reporter came out, and he made up a story and
Oh, yes.
went in the paper, and that's how that started. And of course,
Yeah. What people read the story, and how did they respond?
yes, it got in the paper. Now the interesting thing is that the paper also has a website, and you can go on the website and reply to certain articles.
Yeah.
And here was a chaplain of the Royal Dutch Marines
Yes.
stationed in Doorn, in my little town, who had a son, and he read the article, and they said, "We better do something about this."
Yeah.
So him and his friend, they started what's called an A-team.
Oh, yes.
And that is something that came from the Dutch Marines when they were in Iraq. And they had a group of fighters there, soldiers, that looked after each other, and they called them A-team. So the boys started this A-team.
Oh, yes.
And they decided to look after the monument for,
Yeah.
for the Canadian soldiers, for the
That's
Queen's
very good
Own,
of
and that's how that started.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they continue to look after it.
I was amazed. Yeah, what happened was, so the story went in the paper, and just 2 days before we went back to Canada, the wife and I, we got a call from the newspaper reporter, said, "You better come down." So came
Yeah.
down, saw the father. I gave him a great big hug because him and his
Yeah.
son, they were going to look after this,
Yes.
and that's how that started.
Yeah.
And
So now their intention is to look after that for into the future.
yeah, as long
Yeah.
as they can, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and there's
Yeah.
more young people have joined since.
Oh, yes.
And of course, we send a lot of information back and forth now. And Bill
Yeah.
Brayshaw, the president of Branch 10, decided to get caps and T-shirts and all that, which were donated
Oh, yes.
by a company in Nanaimo. And
Yeah.
we mailed that over.